What is up? I am back on YouTube. I know it's been a minute since you guys have seen me on here. I've been busy moving and getting a new job, and that's why the new setup's here. Still working on it, but we'll see how it goes. So we're gonna go ahead and jump into some preseason rankings, starting with the conference that started the channel, and that is the SEC. So make sure you buckle up and get ready, because I know that these rankings are going to get me roasted in the comments, if there even are comments, because let's face it, nobody watches these, but I'm a psychopath and I love to do them. So let's go. Now, at number 16, last place, bottom of the barrel, worst of the worst, I unfortunately have Mississippi State. And Mississippi State fans, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This season is probably going to be pretty tough for you guys. But there is a vision taking shape for the future. Last year, they had a little bit of hope at quarterback, but the guy they had transferred to LSU to be a backup there because, money and stuff. And now it's back to Blake Shapen. He's experienced, and he's not exactly a bad quarterback, but he's also not the kind of SEC caliber quarterback who can carry a roster full of question marks. The offense overall feels like patchwork. They didn't land a lot of huge names in the portal. They're really relying heavily on development instead of quick fixes, which I think is good for the long term. It's just not going to be good this year. The wide receiver room does have some depth, but there's not really any star power to call out. The run game is basically just hoping someone steps up. There's not really an established feature back or anything. So I don't expect fireworks on offense. It'll probably be pretty conservative with occasional Shapen scrambles or deep shots to keep defenses honest. As for the defense, there is something to build around. They returned some solid contributors, and they've quietly recruited better in the front seven than people realize. The biggest challenge is going to be depth and star power. It's more of a sum of the parts defense than one that has a couple of big monster players that other teams have to game plan around. Then there's the big picture, and that's Jeff Lebby. He's a coach I actually really like long term. He's an offensive guy, but instead of patching holes with portal rental guys everywhere, he's clearly building a program identity and banking on development and banking on the future, and that is the right move for Mississippi State, but it is going to take some time realistically. This probably isn't the year for a huge leap. The quarterback just isn't dynamic enough to overcome the roster gaps. The offensive talent is thin, and the defense might be scrappy, but depth issues will show in the second half of games and probably the second half of the season. But if you are a State fan, like I said, there's hope. You'll get flashes from some of your younger guys. There's a chance to upset someone who overlooks you, and by the late season, some of the pieces that Lebby is developing might start to click, so you might see some hope later in the season. So yeah, this is probably still a rebuild year. In fact, I'm almost certain it is, but it feels like a step towards building something sustainable instead of chasing quick fix portal patches that never pan out. And at number 15, I have the Kentucky Wildcats. Now, Kentucky is basically starting over on offense this year completely. They keep just 2 starters from last season, and almost every other spot is going to be filled by new faces or transfers. At quarterback, it's Zach Calzada, a name that SEC fans might know from his days at Texas A&M, followed by a move down to the FCS, playing for Incarnate Word, and then coming back up now to play for Kentucky back in the SEC. Yes, he is experienced and he is tough, but realistically, I'm just not sold. He hasn't really shown that he can elevate an offense, and it feels like Kentucky grabbed more of a stopgap guy rather than a real difference maker. As for the offensive line, also mostly rebuilt. There's some raw talent there, but it's going to take some time for them to gel, and without elite skill players to bail them out, they're going to have to improve to just be average. They're going to need a lot of improvement quickly to be just average. As for the skill position, again, nothing jumps off the page here. They added a few pieces through the portal, but it's not like they're bringing in proven SEC playmakers or anything. And it really just feels like Kentucky's offensive identity this year is going to be to try to avoid a disaster, which, let's be honest, usually means a lot of low-scoring, boring games. But the defense, this is where there is some hope. Kentucky has already had strong defenses last year and the year before, mostly last year. And now they've added even more pieces to bolster it. And they're tough up front. They're disciplined at linebacker, and the secondary has depth to play aggressive without getting burned on every snap. So what does this mean overall? I think that Kentucky is going to be kind of like Iowa, but wearing blue and white instead of black and yellow. And I think offense is probably going to be hard to watch. Lots of punts, maybe a fluke big play or something here and there. And defense is going to be what keeps them in games, forces turnovers, makes opposing quarterbacks look worse than they actually are. They're probably going to pull off an upset somewhere just by dragging someone else into a rock fight, but over the course of the season, without a real offensive spark, it's hard to see them finishing higher than the bottom quarter of the conference. At 14, I have the Arkansas Razorbacks. Arkansas basically hit the reset button on offense outside of Taylen Green. It's almost all new faces and transfers. Could it work? Sure. Could it be a disaster? Also sure. Taylen Green has legit tools. He's huge, he's fast, and he can keep a drive alive when everything else breaks down. And we saw flashes of him last year where he looked absolutely unstoppable, especially when he was able to get things into a rhythm through the air and on the ground. But here's the thing. He's also inconsistent. Sometimes the deep ball wasn't there. Sometimes he forced throws. Sometimes he disappeared for a quarter or two. That inconsistency is what keeps him from being a truly elite SEC quarterback right now. And around him, it's basically a whole new offense. New starting receivers, highlighted by Omega Blake, who admittedly is a really talented player who has a lot of big playability. But when you look at that offensive line, it's rebuilt, made up of transfers and new faces, and the running back room is also largely turned over. So yes, Green isn't new, but the pieces around him mostly are. And that always brings some chemistry and timing concerns, especially early in the season. Now, defensively, it's the same story. New scheme, a bunch of transfers filling gaps, and a real depth concern when it comes to the linebacker core and up front. Coaching is the X factor, though. Sam Pittman knows offensive lines, and he'll need every bit of that expertise to get this new group serviceable quickly. And Bobby Petrino calling plays on that offense will not be boring. Expect motion, creative sets, and the occasional what was that trick play. The most realistic outlook for Arkansas will probably be an up and down year. They'll lose games when Green's inconsistency shows up and when the defense gets gashed, but they could also scare and even upset better opponents when Green is locked in and Petrino's game plan is clicking. It's not a steady rebuild. It's more like rolling the dice and hoping it all gels fast. The bottom line is that Taylen Green is not new, but the challenge for Arkansas is getting consistency week in and week out, quarterback play while everyone else around him is brand new. At number 13, I have the Vanderbilt Commodores, and it's pretty nice to see them not at the bottom of this list every single year. And they're still not going to be at the top of many preseason lists, but there's actually a lot more going on here than people are going to give them credit for. Let's start with the obvious bright spot. Diego Pavia is back at quarterback. Pavia is tough, he's gritty, he's mobile, he's creative, and he's not afraid to take risks. He kept them competitive in some games that they had no business being close in last year, and that's huge for a program that usually struggles to keep pace. Even better, Vanderbilt finally went shopping in the portal to protect him. They brought in some offensive linemen, and while it won't suddenly make them an elite unit, it should keep Pavia upright a little bit more often. Last year, the O-line was one of the biggest issues. Shoring that up even a little bit can make the offense look very different. At tight end, Eli Stowers returns, which is Pavia's favorite target, and genuinely a solid SEC tight end. That connection should remain the heartbeat of this passing game. The receiver room is still a question mark. They brought in some guys through the portal that are pretty solid, but there really isn't a proven wide receiver one outside of Stowers at tight end. It really feels like a more of a committee approach rather than a star-led group, which can work but usually caps explosive play potential. As running back, it's a similar story. Some pieces, but no standout name that makes defenses nervous. The real wild card here is Clark Lee stepping back from directly calling the defense. The scheme will likely stay pretty similar, but it's going to free Clark Lee to manage the team as a whole and might help him with some of those in-game decisions. Depth is always going to be a concern at Vandy, but the cornerback room is surprisingly decent by Vanderbilt standards, enough to slow down teams that rely purely on the pass. And safety is a weak spot, and the defensive front doesn't really have the star power, so expect them to struggle against teams that can run the ball right at them. But Big picture, Vanderbilt isn't likely to shock the SEC in the same way that they did last year. No one's going to overlook them in the same way, but they're quietly tougher than they were a few years ago. They played spoiler a couple of times, and with Pavia's mobility plus a slightly improved line, they may catch a few teams napping. The ceiling isn't super high, but the floor might be a little higher than people might think. They're still going to be near the bottom, but they're scrappier now. Less of a free win on the schedule and more of a team that you actually have to game plan for. Bottom line, Vanderbilt is not built to win shootouts, but they could absolutely ruin someone else's season with one upset. And for a program still fighting to climb out of the SEC basement, that's definitely something to be proud of. At number 12, I'm about to ruffle some feathers because I have the Missouri Tigers. Missouri is a team that could either quietly overachieve or fall completely flat on their face. And it all starts and maybe ends with the quarterback room. Missouri lost Brady Cook, who wasn't a superstar, but he gave them stability. And now they have Bo Pribula from Penn State, who he can run the ball, sure, genuinely a good athlete, but he hasn't shown to be a good enough passer to make defenses fear him. They also have Sam Horn. They could go with him. He's a highly touted recruit, but he had to get major surgery and clearly hasn't fully won the staff's trust. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't have gone portal shopping to get Pribula. In short, I feel like Missouri doesn't fully believe either guy is the answer. And in the SEC, if you don't have a solid plan at quarterback, that usually spells out trouble. But what about the skill positions? They lost Luther Burden, and there isn't really a true wide receiver one that's coming in who can replace him and fill in those shoes. They added some solid guys, a couple of transfer running backs, but nobody jumps off the page as a game changer. The one exception is tight end Brett Norfleet, who returns for what I expect to be his breakout season. Expect him to be featured quite a bit, kind of like a safety valve in this passing game. As for the offensive line, I wouldn't say it's a huge strength. They've got some experience back, but overall, it's a pretty average SEC unit, and average might not be good enough if the quarterback play is shaky and if they don't have elite receivers to take the pressure off. Now, the good news here is the defense. Missouri actually returns a lot of experience on a defense that was already pretty good, and they added a few potentially high-impact transfers. The defense should have a really solid front, be a really hard team to run against. The linebackers are tough, and there's leadership in the secondary. I don't really see this defense being totally dominant or anything, but it should absolutely keep Missouri in games. And in the SEC, that is sometimes enough to grind you out ugly wins. I think the vibe around Missouri right now feels a lot like solid defense and with an offense hoping to be competent. They might frustrate teams with that defense, but it's going to be hard for them to put up big numbers, I think. And if the quarterback situation doesn't sort itself out quickly, they could have a lot of 3-and-outs and really struggle to score. That being said, a lot of people are a lot higher on Missouri than I am, probably because of what they brought in from the portal and the belief in the coaching staff, because I could definitely see a path where Pribula finds confidence and adds a dangerous run threat. Norfleet emerges as an elite tight end, and the defense holds up, giving the offense time to figure itself out. But to me, it feels like the offense Missouri has might be stuck somewhere in the just okay area. And in the SEC, just okay can often turn into 6-6. So the bottom line for me is that they've got enough on defense to stay scrappy and enough transfer pieces to keep things interesting. But unless the quarterback situation surprises everyone, it's hard to see this as anything more than a middle to lower half SEC team. At number 11, I have the Auburn Tigers. And I feel like their fans finally have something that feels like forward momentum, but it's still complicated. And it all starts with the quarterback. They have Jackson Arnold, who is transferring in, and he is definitely talented, no question about it. He has a strong arm, he has mobility, and he's a big-time recruit coming out of high school. But let's be honest, he still feels raw. There's a difference between talent and consistency, and Auburn's really going to need Arnold to mature quickly because Hugh Freeze needs wins now, not another developmental year. The good news is Auburn surrounded him with some really solid weapons. They brought in several new receivers from the portal to pair with Cam Coleman, who was already a freak show and one of the most exciting young receivers in the league. The most notable transfer in is Eric Singleton, who will definitely be a really solid wide receiver too and stretch the field. He performed really, really well at Georgia Tech when he was there. But still, I think the wide receiver room is not elite yet, but it does definitely look competitive. And that alone is a huge step forward for an offense that struggled to throw the ball consistently last year. As for the offensive line, the interior is strong and experienced, and I think that really matters. It really helps establish the run game and gives Arnold a clean pocket to step up in, something that he didn't have when he was at Oklahoma, so that might cause him to have a better performance. The tackles are still a bit of a question, so don't be shocked if Auburn has games where edge rushers cause problems. But the bigger offensive concern for me is running back. They lost their clear running back number one in Jarquez Hunter, and while there are capable guys in that room, there really isn't a single proven star, and that means the run game could feel very by committee, and Arnold might need to shoulder more offense than I think Auburn fans and that coaching staff is going to be comfortable with. So it's not ideal, especially early in this year. Defensively, Auburn is a bit of a mixed bag. They got some solid pieces, especially at DB, and few transfer additions that came in, but the front seven has big question marks on it. Stopping the run might be a struggle, and the linebacker room lacks proven difference makers. The pass rush isn't terrible, but probably isn't elite. And what makes Auburn interesting, I think, is the coaching staff. Hugh Freeze is known for creative offenses, and he has shown that he can get quarterbacks to play above their raw talent level, just not at Auburn yet. And if Arnold takes to the system quickly, Auburn might have an offense that can mask some of those defensive flaws. And even if the run game isn't dominant, those new receivers should help stretch defenses horizontally and vertically. So realistically, Auburn, I don't think is ready to compete for the SEC title, but this is definitely the most balanced roster they've had since Freeze took over. They have a quarterback with real upside, better receivers than in recent years, solid interior offensive line. There's a lot of good things. So bottom line, it's probably not a breakout year, but Auburn fans should finally see an offense with life and creativity and a defense that, while not elite, won't get completely steamrolled. And that's real progress. It sets the stage for a bigger leap in the next year or two. At number 10, I have the Tennessee Volunteers. Tennessee heads into 2025 with a lot of question marks, and it feels like the Vols are teetering between solid and sliding back in the pack. But let's start with the elephant in the room. Nico Iamaleava is gone, and that is a huge blow. He was supposed to be the face of the program, the quarterback who keeps them near the top of the SEC, so losing him changes the entire ceiling for this team. But what less people are talking about is who they brought in to replace him, Joey Aguilar. Aguilar might not be Nico, but he also isn't some random plug-and-play player either. Statistically, he actually had a better year than Nico did last season. Though it was against weaker competition, I'll give you that. He's experienced, he's pretty steady, he's unlikely to completely melt down, he's quick, he's got a quick release, he can extend plays, and he brings decent mobility. So it's not a disaster at quarterback, but it is a step back from what Tennessee fans were hoping for. The bigger problem here is what's around him. They lost Dylan Sampson, who was their star running back and an engine for this offense. The wide receiver room is thin and young, and there's no proven wide receiver one who scares defenses. Several guys with potential, but they haven't done it yet on Saturdays. And the offensive line was already shaky, and they're still trying to plug some of those holes. Depth is definitely a concern, and what this unit does could limit everything else they want to do offensively. All that means is that Tennessee might struggle to do what they've done best under Josh Heupel, and that's play fast, spread you out, and score in bunches. Defensively, I also have a lot of concerns, not because of what talent they have, but because of what's going on with the talent on and off the field. Boo Carter is supposed to be a huge part of this defense, but he's not showing up to workouts, so he might not play. McCoy was their best DB and one of the best in the country, but he's recovering from an ACL injury, so we have no idea if he's going to be healthy enough to play or play at 100%. And that's on top of losing their best defensive player in James Pierce Jr. to the NFL. However, they do have depth up front. The defensive line and secondary both look solid. The linebacker room is probably the biggest question mark here. It's not awful, but it's also not proven or deep. The defense probably won't be elite, but it should be at least good enough to keep them in games, especially against teams that also have flaws. Basically, Tennessee does not look like a team that is going to totally collapse. The floor feels like a scrappy 6-7 win team, but the ceiling that Nico gave them a real, legit SEC contender, a scary offense that could outscore almost anyone, all that is gone for now. Aguilar can keep them competitive, but unless the wide receiver room and O-line surprise everyone, the offense will not be explosive like the Vol fans are used to. So here's the bottom line. They're good enough to beat the mid-tier SEC teams. They'll fight on defense and probably pull off at least one big win. But with losses at quarterback, running back, and a shallow wide receiver room, it's hard to see Tennessee lighting up scoreboards like they did a couple seasons ago. It's not a total rebuild, but it is a reset. And this is really going to test how good Heupel really is at getting production out of a roster that on paper just has too many gaps. At number 9, I have the Ole Miss Rebels. And Ole Miss under Lane Kiffin has never been boring, and this year is no exception. But the season feels like one big new era experiment with real upside and real risk. So let's start with the quarterback. It's officially Austin Simmons' time after Jackson Dart moved on to the NFL. Simmons has a lot of talent. He has a big arm, mobility, and the tools to become a true star. But here's the catch. He is young. He's never been a full-time SEC starter. That usually means you're going to have some growing pains. And it wouldn't be shocking if he has some games where he looks brilliant and others where mistakes pile up. The good news, Ole Miss isn't completely handcuffed if Simmons struggles early. They brought in some experienced transfer quarterbacks who could step in if needed. But make no mistake, Simmons is the guy Lane Kiffin wants to develop, and his ceiling is higher than any of the backups. At receiver, it's almost a complete overhaul. Lane did what Lane does, and he went to the portal and brought in a brand new wide receiver core. It actually looks like a pretty solid group on paper, enough speed and versatility to make defenses pretty scared. But chemistry takes time, and it's always a roll of the dice whenever you take an entire unit, especially like a passing attack, and build it with guys who have never played together. Offensive line is also seeing a lot of new starters. Talent isn't really an issue here. They've recruited and added well, but when you swap out so many pieces again, it's fair to expect some inconsistency early in the year. All told, this offense should still be dangerous because Lane's schemes create space and Simmons has real arm talent. But it might take a few games to really click, and there's always a chance that the all-new everything approach backfires. Defensively, last year was really solid for the Rebels, especially along the defensive line. This year, though, it's going to be tough to really match what that unit did. They lost almost all their top contributors on that line, and they did bring in some promising prospects through the portal, but proven production matters, and right now it is a question mark. The good news is they still have Suntrain Perkins, who is a legit difference maker, and he can anchor that defense. The secondary also took some hits with departures. They still have some experienced guys back, but losing proven starters often means more blown coverages and big plays allowed, especially early on. The offense probably improves a little bit because of Simmons, who adds more vertical threat and athleticism, but the defense likely takes a step back, especially up front and possibly in that secondary. So the bottom line is this is still going to be a really fun team to watch. Lane Kiffin teams always are. They could absolutely upset better teams and look unstoppable some weeks, but week-to-week consistency is going to be a real challenge here, and that's why I see Ole Miss as likely better offensively, worse defensively. And it's high variance, for this team, capable of thrilling wins and head-scratching losses, which honestly feels pretty on brand for Lane Kiffin. At number 8, I have South Carolina, and that might be low for some people, but I think South Carolina is kind of in an odd spot this year because they have one thing I really, really like and a lot of other things that worry me. So let's start with a thing that I really, really like, and that is LaNorris Sellers at quarterback. He is the real deal. People are talking about him as a possible Heisman candidate, and I can absolutely see that. He is dynamic, he can run, he can extend plays, and he can throw accurately on the move. He showed flashes last year that make you believe he could single-handedly keep them in games they shouldn't be in, kind of like a Cam Newton at Auburn, which I'm not comparing him to Cam Newton, I'm just saying he is a huge player for this team. Sellers gives them a spark that few other teams in the bottom half of the SEC can match. But here's the problem. He's going to have to do almost everything. Last year's offense wasn't great, and they lost two of their biggest weapons. Rocket Sanders at running back, who added power and balance to this ground game, he's gone. Josh Simon, a tight end who was often Sellers' security blanket on third downs, he's gone. At receiver, they brought in some solid transfers and they have some young talent, but nobody is proven as a wide receiver one. There's depth, but that ceiling feels pretty low. There's more solid college guys than real stars. Running back, again, transfers and depth, but no one who looks like they could fill Rocket's shoes, which probably means more pressure on Sellers to run the ball himself, which is dangerous both for his health and for the offense's predictability. Offensive line wasn't great last year, and there are questions again this year. Even if it improves, it likely won't be good enough to hide the lack of elite skill talent. Now for the defense, South Carolina lost a lot here too, especially in the front seven, and they're going to really rely heavily on young linebackers who haven't played many snaps. That's usually a recipe for missed assignments and big plays given up, especially against better SEC offenses. They do have some solid pieces back in the secondary, though, and the defensive line has a couple of names I do like, but depth and consistency do look shaky. Sellers, like I said, is the X factor. He's genuinely good enough to steal games, but the roster around him has too many, maybe this transfer pans out or maybe this young guy steps up to really feel confident. On offense, losing Rocket Sanders and Josh Simon means defenses can key in on Sellers, meaning he might not be as productive. And on defense, the youth at linebacker and turnover up front could mean real struggle stopping the run. The bottom line is that South Carolina is probably not going to crater. Sellers is way too good for that, but they look more like a team built to pull one or two big upsets than one that can week to week compete in the SEC. A few highlight wins, maybe some fun Seller moments, but the roster gaps likely keep them firmly in the middle to lower half of this conference. It's a fun but flawed team, and it all comes down to just how much Sellers can carry on his shoulders. At number 7, I have the Florida Gators, and this team is quietly one of the most fascinating teams of the season because there's talent there, but the path is brutally tough. And I'm not going to hold it against them. Scheduling is not a part of these rankings, but it's something I wanted to point out. So let's go ahead and move on to why I'm really optimistic about this team, and that's DJ Lagway. If he's healthy, he might already be one of the best quarterbacks in the country, and that's not just hype. He's a playmaker. He can throw from multiple platforms. He keeps his eyes downfield, and he adds mobility. He's the kind of quarterback who can win you games that you probably shouldn't win, and Florida hasn't had that in quite some time. As for the supporting cast on offense, the running back room is not full of flashy superstars, but it's solid and it's reliable. They have two backs who can share carries, keep each other fresh, and grind out those tough yards. As for the offensive line, it's where Florida quietly shines. It's one of the better units in the SEC. They have legit size and experience, and they won't just keep Lagway upright. They should be able to actually control the pace of games, which matters against better SEC defenses. The wide receiver room, Dallas Wilson's the name to watch. He has some big play threat. He can stretch the field, and he should be Lagway's go-to guy. Outside of Wilson, though, there is less proven depth, so someone may need to step up to keep defenses honest. Speaking of the defense, Florida brings back a lot of last year's defense, which is a double-edged sword. The experience helps, and they won't really be out of place against SEC offenses, but they really struggled on the back half of the season, especially against their top-tier competition. Their strength is in the trenches on both sides. Defensive line has both depth and really good starting talent, so they should be able to help, slow down those run-heavy teams and create some interior pressure. Linebackers and secondary do have some questions. They need more playmakers who can change a game with turnovers or big stops. Florida was often really solid defensively last year, but rarely ever game-changing. The biggest wild card here is the schedule. It's absolutely brutal, like I said. Multiple playoff caliber teams, nasty road trips, and no real soft spot to catch their breath. So even if Florida is better on the field, their record might not fully reflect that. Bottom line is Florida is legitimately better, especially at quarterback and in the trenches. The question really isn't are they improved? It's whether the improvement is enough to show up in the win column given how hard the schedule is. And if the wide receiver room steps up and the defense finds a couple new playmakers, Florida could surprise a lot of people. If not, they'll still be competitive, but might not end up being one of those playoff teams. They'll probably end up being, the best 7-5 team in the country. It's a team with a real bite, but also real questions that only Saturdays can answer. But if you can guarantee me health at the quarterback position, I would have this team as high up as number 5. In fact, that's where I had them for most of the time I made this list. I think Lagway and this team has the potential to be that good, but Lagway has had a variety of health concerns both last season and in the offseason that hold me back from putting them that high. The problem is that this team is really built around him. There's no superstar backup to fall back on this year, so they don't really have depth. If he goes down or is at half health, this team is in serious trouble. So that's why I have them here at number 7. At number 6, I have the Oklahoma Sooners, and they are a really fascinating team this year because the roster has real upside, but also glaring unknowns that could swing this season either way. Let's start with what excites me, and that's John Mateer at quarterback, who might honestly be the single best transfer addition in the entire SEC, maybe the entire country. This guy can run, he can throw on the move, and he can attack defenses in multiple ways. He adds an extra layer to the offense that Oklahoma has not seen in a long time. And they also brought in Jaden Ott at running back from Cal, and he is a huge pickup as well. He's physical, he's shifty, he's a true workhorse who can really take the pressure off of Mateer. Those two put together instantly make Oklahoma's offense look a lot more dynamic and balanced than they were last year. At receiver, they're not super flashy, as say like LSU or Georgia, but it's a deep group with experience. They have Deion Burks, who, if he's able to stay healthy, he could be a legit game changer, the kind of player who can flip a game with a single catch. And there also are a few other proven guys and some young talent who flashed in camp. So the wide receiver room should not be a problem. But then we get to the biggest question mark, and I'm sure everyone watching this probably knows it's the offensive line. It was terrible last year, genuinely one of the worst among all power teams, and Oklahoma tried to fix it with adding multiple transfers, and on paper they did add some experience and some size, but the question is, does that actually translate? Because you can't fully scheme around a leaky offensive line, especially in the SEC where defenses are nasty. If the O-line even improves to being just average, the offense could really be tough to stop. Mateer's mobility helps mask some of those issues, and Ott is good enough to turn small holes into really big gains. So I have a lot of optimism about this offense. It's just all up to whether the O-line can hold up. Now, the defense is surprisingly positive this year. Yes, they lost some players, but I actually think this defense will be better than a lot of people give it credit for. Probably one of the better units in the conference. Strong defensive ends and linebackers who can bring pressure. The defensive line, while maybe not elite, should be solid enough to keep them from getting bullied up front. And the secondary, they have some holes from departures, but there's talent and a few key returners that give hope for solid coverage. Basically, I think Oklahoma added some real difference makers on offense. The defense should be better than people might realize, but the season hinges almost entirely on that offensive line. Like I said, if they can't protect Mateer or open up holes for Ott, it'll waste the talent they have at those skill positions. If they can just hold up, this team could genuinely score with anyone. Bottom line, Oklahoma is built like a classic high ceiling, low floor team. If the transfers pan out, especially on the offensive line, they could be one of the most dangerous teams in the conference, maybe even push in the top 5 by midseason. But if the line stays bad, it won't matter how good John Mateer or Jaden Ott are. Either way, they're going to be fun to watch, and probably in a lot of games that come down to the final drive. Just barely cracking my top 5 is Texas A&M, and they're a team that always seems to be right there on the cusp, just about to jump over the edge and be a really elite team, but they never end up getting it done. This year, it feels like another moment where on paper, everything is lined up for them to make that jump, but it really comes down to how they execute and how it plays out on the field. First up, let's talk about the offense. Marcel Reed is back, and the kid is the real deal. He's a dual threat guy, legit passer, and he's comfortable throwing on the move. What really makes him scary is that he can extend plays, bring you deep, and simply keep drives alive with his legs. The Aggies didn't just stop there, though. They went and got KC Concepcion from NC State, who's the dynamic, do-it-all receiver. He should be really great for them. Great after the catch. He can play slot or outside and pairs beautifully with the other wide receiver talent they already have on campus. In the running back room, they're stacked, they're experienced, physical, and they should be able to take some of that pressure off of Reed, especially since Reed himself is a running threat. As for the offensive line, genuinely looks really good on paper. They have both size and returning experience, plus a few younger guys who could really step up. And they should be good enough to give Reed time and create lanes for the running backs. All this adds up to what could be a very fun, very effective offense, maybe even one of the best in the SEC if it all comes together. But it's Texas A&M, so there's always going to be a but. Defense is going to be the question mark here. Last season, the defense was downright frustrating. They had big talent, but they were wildly inconsistent, and they struggled to generate pressure. They got burned in coverage, and at times they just couldn't stop the run. Pass rush in particular was pretty underwhelming despite having some individual talent. Here's where it gets interesting, though. Mike Elko is not new to the Aggies, but as a head coach, he is reportedly taking direct control of the defense. Elko knows how to build it tough, disciplined defense, but it's not going to flip overnight. So it still comes down to new guys stepping up, transfer additions making an immediate impact, and better communication across the board. If Elko can just get them to be solid, not even elite, just solid, the offense could carry them into contender status. So bottom line here is that Texas A&M has the pieces to be really, really good. Offense might remind people of what Jaden Daniels and LSU look like, explosive, creative, dangerous at every level. But if the defense is even half as shaky as it was last year, it'll keep them stuck as good but not great. This is a prove-it year for them. They finally have a coach in Elko who feels like the right culture fit. And they have a legit quarterback in Reed, and they have skill talent all over the place. If the defense improves, watch out. If it doesn't, Aggies fans might be left wondering what more it takes. At number 4, I have Alabama. The Crimson Tide are always interesting because even when there are clear question marks, it feels like they are never truly out of the mix. Will that continue under Kalen DeBoer now that Nick Saban's, been gone? Who knows? But this year, there are some more new changes. Starting out with Ty Simpson at quarterback. He's not a total unknown. We've seen some flashes, but he's more of a traditional pocket passer compared to Jalen Milroe. He's still athletic enough to move, though. He doesn't really have the same game-breaking running ability that Milroe had, but what he can do is operate the offense more efficiently and get the ball out quicker and potentially be more consistent in the intermediate passing game, which is huge for this team because last year they often lived and died by Milroe's hero ball. They did bring in offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb. He's reuniting with Kalen DeBoer. He was on that same staff that made it to the national championship with DeBoer. The scheme is going to look very different, more timing-based throws, using space and quick reads to keep the chains moving, still pushing the ball downfield, but in a way that fits a more classic quarterback like Simpson. As for the skill positions, they're pretty loaded. Wide receiver room looks legit. Obviously, they have Ryan Smith still. Some real burners on the outside and sure-handed route guys inside. Running back room also super solid. Not superstars like Najee Harris or Derrick Henry type of superstars, but depth and versatility. Tight end, still a question mark here. Injuries forced Bama to backfill with transfers, so it's a wait-and-see spot. Offensive line, left side's pretty strong. Right tackle is a real worry for me. Pass protection could be shaky, and I think that matters with the quarterback who isn't as slippery as Milroe. Depth overall isn't really going to be what it used to be, so injuries definitely could bite them. As for the defense, the defensive backfield is in pretty good shape, I would say. They have some pretty good experience plus some high-level talent. The linebackers are still strong. They are especially strong on the outside, but there are real concerns in the trenches. Interior defensive line, they lost some dudes. They feel a little bit thin. The pass rush, especially off the edge, doesn't really look as scary as a classic Saban-era Bama. And that's a bigger deal than it sounds because if they can't get pressure, even a talented secondary can't hold forever. And if teams can run up the middle, it will change everything. Basically, this feels like an Alabama team that might not suffocate you defensively, but instead has to outscore you, which is not something we've seen and is a little strange to think about, but could actually be pretty fun to watch. Ty Simpson's ceiling isn't as obviously dynamic as Milroe's, but he could make the offense more consistent, fewer 3-and-outs, better rhythm. Bottom line, it's still an elite roster. This is still Alabama, and they're still incredibly well coached. But the floor is lower than Saban's Alabama. The questions in the trenches mean they might be vulnerable in matchups they used to dominate in. It's a different look. It's less of an imposing bully style and more of a high-octane balanced attack. And how far they will go will come down to how quickly Ty Simpson and the right side of the line can settle in. At number 3, I know I'm going to leave some of you scratching your head because I have a team here that I think a lot of people are going to have as their number 1 team, and that is Texas. They are must-watch TV this season, not just because of the logo on their helmet, but because of who they have at quarterback. The real headline, Arch Manning is finally getting to start, and everyone's going to frame the entire season around him. And sure, he's going to have his moments where that hype looks justified, beautiful deep balls, surprising mobility, and flashes of real poise. But I also expect some rough patches, especially early, because even great young quarterbacks need reps to settle in, unless he's, the next Tim Tebow, which some people do think he will be. But here's what I think the real story is. Texas had a monster draft class last year, and that's great for recruiting. But it also means a lot of proven stars and proven starters are gone, especially along the offensive line and at tight end. And unlike some SEC peers, Texas did not replace those O-line losses with a wave of high-profile portal additions. They chose to trust some guys they developed internally, players who have been in the system, practiced for years, but haven't really started much. If they're right about those guys and they step up, it proves that Texas really can develop talent and the offense might click faster than people think. If not, Arch will be under siege and the run game will stall, and that's going to derail even the best quarterback. Speaking of the run game, though, the running back room is solid. They're physical, experienced backs who don't need to be superstars if the line blocks well. Tight end, likely a step back. The losing Gunnar Helm does matter. He was reliable, and he was a solid blocker. The wide receiver room is still in good shape. They have a mix of proven talent and promising young guys. Maybe not quite as deep as LSU or Georgia, but enough weapons for Arch to spread it around. Now the defense is quietly built to cause headaches. Edge rushers and linebackers are the strength. Expect Texas to get real pressure, which helps everyone behind them. Secondary is good. Maybe not quite the dominant level we saw last year, but definitely above average. And losing a few pieces definitely hurts, but there's definitely still enough talent here that I don't expect to collapse by any measure. Basically, I think this season is not really about, is Arch good? He probably will be. And at least he eventually definitely will be, I think. It's more about whether Texas as a whole program is ready to step up from being just really talented to being truly elite. They're betting big on development and culture over flashy portal fixes, which I do like. If it pays off, they could be playoff level good this year, national championship level good this year. If it doesn't, they'll still be dangerous, but maybe stuck as a top 10 team that can't quite finish the job. Bottom line, Texas is not short on talent. They haven't been for years, but the questions are real. Will the O-line be good enough? Can Arch handle the early heat? And can the defense keep them in games while offense is trying to figure it out? There's enough upside that you could see them become the best team in the country by November, but also enough unknowns to keep them from starting the year in that spot for me. At number 2, I have my Georgia Bulldogs. And you can call me biased if you want, and you're probably right. I think Georgia's in a really weird place this year because they're absolutely loaded by almost any standard, but compared to the best Georgia teams over the past few years, there are some very real question marks. And because it's Georgia, the standard isn't just good, the standard is unbeatable. So let's start with a headline change. Gunnar Stockton is QB1. He's not Carson Beck, but he's more athletic and he's more comfortable as a true dual threat quarterback. And I think that he actually fits better with what Mike Bobo wants to run for this offense. And that's more design QB runs, more RPO looks, and more rollouts to simplify reads. The chemistry between Stockton and Bobo matters because they've worked together a lot already. Stockton does not need to learn a whole new system from scratch. He already knows what Bobo wants to do. And this is why I actually like Stockton more than I liked Beck. Beck had better arm talent, sure, but Stockton adds something that Georgia missed last year, and that's the ability to make plays when the pocket breaks down. And there were a lot of broken pockets last year because of the offensive line, which is the biggest question mark on the entire team. They lost starters, and the line was, already bad by Georgia standards. So if they're adding in these new players, is it going to be better? They struggled in pass pro last year. They didn't create enough, push in the run game. So these new starters could help, but they're still mostly unproven, and Georgia's offensive success really depends on whether this group can give Stockton time to open holes. The run game, they have Nate Frazier. He's definitely a name to watch as he develops. He's explosive, he's shifty, and he can turn nothing into something, but he can't do much if the O-line doesn't help him open up lanes. The receivers, quietly the best Georgia has looked in this position in years. Noah Thomas and Zachariah Branch are going to be difference makers. They have speed, big playability, and they're great at route running. At tight end, they are taking a step back. I mean, obviously, there's not going to be any Brock Bowers level talent here. Almost no one has that. Defense, is where Georgia, could probably look more like vintage UGA again. The linebackers and secondary are legitimate strengths. They're deep, they're experienced, they're smart. The defensive line lost some talent, especially off the edge. So edge rush could be the one place Georgia isn't elite on this defense. But with this coaching staff and the defensive back seven, I think that they're still very, very tough to score on. Basically, Kirby Smart has earned the benefit of the doubt. Georgia reloads better than almost anyone. Kirby could probably build a top 10 defense out of a Waffle House staff, so I'm not really worried there. But there's a real sense that this team is not as bulletproof as it was in 2021 and 2022. Heck, last year the O-line was shaky, the run game stalled, the receivers had butter for hands, and the play calling felt like someone had set Madden to conservative. This season will hinge on whether the O-line can be at least good and whether Stockton can handle the SEC heat without making mistakes. Another thing I want to call out about Stockton is I think that he has the grit that Georgia needs that Carson Beck didn't have. I think he has that homegrown grit, that edge to him that I think Georgia needs culture-wise. So I just wanted to point that out. Anyways, bottom line, Georgia is not falling off a cliff. They likely will still be in the playoff race, but this year feels less like the unbeatable machine and more like a very talented team with some questions. If the questions get answered, they could absolutely win it all, but if they don't, there's enough there for someone else to catch them. Still a monster, just one that has to prove it in a few key spots. And that leaves us with one more team. The number one team in the SEC, for my money, is the LSU Tigers. And this might just be the year that they make that serious playoff push, and it all starts with continuity at the quarterback position paired with real firepower. Let's start with Garrett Nussmeier. What I love about him is that it's not just arm talent, which he does have. It's also about how he reads defenses and how he stands tall even when the pocket collapses. And let's be real, this is a potential Heisman season for him if he makes the jump most people think that he can. And here's why I think this team could be special. For one, they brought in the number 2 portal class, and they didn't just bring in these depth pieces. They brought in difference makers. Barian Brown at wide receiver is electric, a game breaker who can turn screens into 60-yard touchdowns. And the wide receiver room looks absolutely reloaded, which is scary when you're pairing that with a quarterback as confident and accurate as Nussmeier. The biggest question mark here is the offensive line. They added talent, but again, gelling takes time. Even if they're, average to good, Nussmeier has the skill players to carve up defenses, but if they struggle to protect him, suddenly those weapons don't matter as much. In the running game, I really like Caden Durham. He showed some flashes last season. The real question is going to be, can he stay healthy and become a true feature back? If he does, the O-line, comes together, then I think LSU has a really balanced offense that's even harder to defend. As for the defense, this is where the whole season is going to hinge because LSU fans know, from recent history that they can have an explosive defense but can be held back by a defense that just can't get stops. This year, they have more talent, but still a lot of new and unproven guys. The front seven is bolstered by transfers and young guys who could be stars or could be inconsistent. They brought in guys in that defense like Patrick Payton who add explosiveness off the edge and just true leadership. The secondary should be improved, but again, a lot of this is on paper. Basically, LSU isn't just a fun team on paper. They're actually built to win. If the defense turns from liability to even pretty good and the O-line becomes serviceable, Nussmeier and this wide receiver room can go toe-to-toe with anyone. But they're still LSU. There will be wild games, big plays, maybe even a crazy upset win or two, but this might finally be the year they put it all together and become a legit playoff threat. So there you have it, my 2025 preseason SEC rankings. Please let me know in the comments if you agree, if you disagree, if you think I'm out of my mind. Just drop your takes in the comments, hit like, subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.